So we've gone from 32,000 in total down to 300. We're at less than 1% of the original forces. That's almost getting to the kind of odds we had described by Joshua near the end of that book in chapter 23, where Joshua was saying, one person would put 1,000 of the enemy to flight. This is bringing the odds down to 1% rather than the 0.1% that would be. But still, it's statistically, giving yourselves much less of a chance of completing this under your own strength. And that's the key part, under their own strength. What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. Okay. So we're looking at Judges chapter 7 now. In the last chapter, Gideon was introduced as an important character, person who, I guess at this point is now considered judge in Israel. And let's just say he hasn't exactly been a shining example of strength and courage. Especially the courage part is a little lacking. Feels like he needs to test God on various things. And questions how he could even lead the people because he's from, the weakest clan in his tribe. And he's, quote, the least in his family. But anyway, we all know that God can work past, fears, doubts, and all that kind of stuff. So let's see how God winds up doing that as we continue along here in chapter 7. So here we go. So Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and his army got up early and went as far as the spring of Harod. The armies of Midian were camped north of them in the valley near the hill of Moreh. The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many warriors with you. If I let all of you fight the Midianites, the Israelites will boast to me that they saved themselves by their own strength. Therefore tell the people, whoever is timid or afraid may leave this mountain and go home." So 22,000 of them went home, leaving only 10,000 who were willing to fight. That's over 2/3 of the people who were there who considered themselves too timid or afraid. Which, a little bit of fear is kind of understandable. You're only facing off against the people who have been essentially ruling over you and causing major issues for years. But at the same time, it's why would you volunteer for this if you were that afraid? I guess it was more so the motivation of wanting to help free the people from this, oppressive rule. But I don't know. Anyway, footnote there at mountain. The Hebrew says may leave Mount Gilead. The identity of Mount Gilead is uncertain in this context, perhaps used here as another name for Mount Gilboa. Okay. So, it's not 100% sure which mountain exactly is being mentioned here, but not that necessarily takes away from the broader story, because there are other geographical context clues that don't necessarily leave it completely unknown where all this was happening. But anyway, so 22,000 soldiers went home, and there's 10,000 left. Then we get to verse 4. But the Lord told Gideon, "There are still too many. Bring them down to the spring, and I will test them to determine who will go with you and who will not." When Gideon took his warriors down to the water, the Lord told him, "Divide the men into 2 groups. In one group, put all those who cup water in their hands and lap it up with their tongues like dogs. In the other group, put all those who kneel down and drink with their mouths in the stream." Only 300 of the men drank from their hands. All the others got down on their knees and drank with their mouths in the stream. Okay, I'll just pause there for a little bit. So we've gone from 32,000 in total, down to 300. We're at less than 1% of the original forces, which, I mean, that's almost getting to the kind of odds we had described by Joshua near the end of that book in chapter 23, where Joshua was saying, one person would put 1,000 of the enemy to flight. This is, bringing the odds down to 1% rather than the 0.1% that would be. But still, it's statistically, giving yourselves much less of a chance of completing this under your own strength. And that's the key part, under their own strength. Also, I've heard some different thoughts about why it would have been the men who, cup the water and drink it from their hands that were chosen. I don't know if there was a specific reason for it other than that there were so few of them. It does give an indication that those men either would have been more scared, but the ones who were scared already left, so that doesn't seem likely to me. Another possible explanation is that the men who would have, drank the water like that were kind of keeping a better eye on their surroundings and basically more prepared for an ambush or other sudden conflict. But again, I don't think that was the reason that God chose those men so much as it was just all right, well, now the numbers are way down low. This is how we're going to know that it's a God thing and not, just Israel's own strength saving them. All right. Getting to verse 7 now. And I might maybe provide a little less commentary from here on. Depends on what's said. Anyway. All right, verse 7. The Lord told Gideon, "With these 300 men I will rescue you and give you victory over the Midianites. Send all the others home." So Gideon collected the provisions and ram's horns of the other warriors and sent them home. But he kept the 300 men with him. The Midianite camp was in the valley just below Gideon. That night the Lord said, "Get up, go down into the Midianite camp, for I have given you victory over them. But if you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah. Listen to what the Midianites are saying, and you will be greatly encouraged. Then you will be eager to attack." So Gideon took Purah and went down to the edge of the enemy camp. The armies of Midian, Amalek, and the people of the east had settled in the valley like a swarm of locusts. Their camels were like grains of sand on the seashore, too many to count. Gideon crept up just as a man was telling his companion about a dream. The man said, "I had this dream, and in my dream a loaf of barley bread came tumbling down into the Midianite camp. It hit a tent, turned it over, and knocked it flat." His companion answered, "Your dream can mean only one thing. God has given Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite, victory over Midian and all its allies." Okay, I'm going to pause there. Didn't necessarily want to interrupt what was going on for a little bit there. Also, some of these, like, mid-verse paragraph breaks left me disinclined from stopping what I was reading. Anyway, so 300 men are going to go attack. Actually, technically not just the Midianites, also the Amalekites and some other people, but point being, large armies consisting of multiple kingdoms and or people groups, I guess. But given the pattern that Gideon has shown God thus far of not exactly being very courageous, God still tells him, okay, look, I'm going to give you victory over them, but if you really want that extra little bit of assurance, because I know you've asked for that before, you and, I think, okay, he says your servant Purah. Servants, I mean, that role could be described as a couple of different things, really. But anyway, he's like, okay, if you're still not sure, you and Purah go down there, scout things out, get a little listen on what the enemy's saying, and you'll be encouraged by that, if you weren't already. So then they go down and they hear about this dream from one of the enemy soldiers that basically is interpreted as, you know, God giving Gideon victory over them. Which is interesting how just a random dream interpretation from a random dude somewhat plays an important role in this, because that's what gives Gideon encouragement. Or at least, supposedly, we haven't gotten that far yet, but I don't know if I would have necessarily interpreted the dream that way, but it also does make sense. I mean, a loaf of barley bread tumbling down into the camp and knocking a tent over. Like, that's, I could see how the interpretation of it makes sense, and I guess I wouldn't exactly come up with any other interpretation myself, just off the top of my head. So, But anyway, so all that happens, and then we get to verse 15. When Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, he bowed in worship before the Lord. Then he returned to the Israelite camp and shouted, "Get up, for the Lord has given you victory over the Midianite hordes." I was about to read that as borders. Anyway. He divided the 300 men into 3 groups and gave each man a ram's horn and a clay jar with a torch in it. Why would the torch be in the clay jar? I don't know. That seems a little odd, but whatever. Also, footnote there at Lord says that's, as in Greek, Hebrew just reads he bowed. So it doesn't say he bowed in worship before the Lord. It just says he bowed. But why else would he be bowing? So I think that's really just there to make it more obvious what the likely reason for him bowing was. Anyway. So, they've got ram's horns and clay jars with torches. Verse 17. Then he said to them, "Keep your eyes on me. When I come to the edge of the camp, do just as I do. As soon as I and those with me blow the ram's horns, blow your horns too, all around the entire camp, and shout, for the Lord and for Gideon." It was just after midnight, after the changing of the guard, when Gideon and the 100 men with him reached the edge of the Midianite camp. Suddenly they blew the ram's horns and broke their clay jars. Then all three groups blew their horns and broke their jars. They held the blazing torches in their left hands and the horns in their right hands, and they all shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." Okay, the sword part wasn't mentioned in Gideon's prior instructions, but whatever, details. So, blowing the horns, and they break the clay jars. It doesn't exactly specify how they got the torches lit, but maybe the torches were already lit within the jars. I don't know. Not an important detail. The fact of it being dark, though, is an important detail, because otherwise the torches would have done nothing. Hebrew says at the beginning of the second watch, rather than, just after midnight. But it does also specify here after the changing of the guard. So, whether or not it was just after midnight, it was whenever the nighttime guards would have been changing over. Pretty much. So, Gideon has 100 men with him, and then there's two other groups of 100 men at other spots around the camp. And then, of course, Gideon takes the lead in blowing the horn and, breaking the jars with the torches, and then the other groups follow suit. So then, verse 21. Each man stood at his position around the camp and watched as all the Midianites rushed around in a panic, shouting as they ran to escape. When the 300 Israelites blew their ram's horns, the Lord caused the warriors in the camp to fight against each other with their swords. Those who were not killed fled to places as far away as Beth-shittah near Zererah, and to the border of Abel-meholah near Tabbath. Names, anyway. Then Gideon sent for the warriors of Naphtali, Asher, and Manasseh, who joined in chasing the army of Midian. Gideon also sent messengers throughout the hill country of Ephraim, saying, "Come down to attack the Midianites. Cut them off at the shallow crossings of the Jordan River at Beth-barah." So all the men of Ephraim did as they were told. They captured Oreb and Zeb, the two Midianite commanders, killing Oreb at the rock of Oreb and Zeb at the winepress of Zeb. And they continued to chase the Midianites. Afterward, the Israelites brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon, who was by the Jordan River. So, the strategy here, which was God's strategy for being completely clear about this is not, you might think a human would come up with this, but a human would also tend to think more about a, backup plan in case it actually just, draws the enemy troops towards what's making the sound. But, so they blew the horns all around the camp, and basically that threw the enemy soldiers into a panic. A bunch of them started fighting each other. Others just ran away completely, trying to, save their lives. And then I guess other soldiers and warriors in the area that weren't with them, which were plenty, as we're well aware of. There were 30,000 of them that had been, basically ruled out of this particular group, or whatever you want to call it. So, basically then Gideon called on other people, warriors, whoever in the area, to chase down any of the Midianites that were fleeing and just trying to, save their lives, to potentially come back and fight another day, Rather than letting them come back and fight another day, Gideon says, hey, look out for these people. And, yeah, let's not allow them to become a problem later. And then 2 of the commanders were killed, and their heads were brought to Gideon. And it doesn't say anything about there being peace in the land, so we're maybe not done with Gideon's story just yet. But that's all that we've got in chapter 7 here. Okay, so that's Judges chapter 7. More stuff about Gideon. Rather significant victory over the Midianites with only 300 men. It seems like we're maybe not quite done yet either. Because there wasn't the usual, like, all right, well, then this person died and or there was peace in the land for this long. So there might still be more in the Israel versus Midian kind of thing going on. But we'll have to see about that in the next chapter. Anyway, as always, like and share if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell if you're on YouTube to get updates when I post new videos. If you're seeing this over on Rumble, give me a follow over there. Either way, look down in the description for info on other social media pages and all that good stuff. And leave comments down below there with any thoughts you have. So that'll do it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you soon for another video. Whatever the case is, till next time, stay cool, people.